Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General, congratulations, and thank you for your service and to your wife and family, and I also appreciate your acknowledgement of General Dunford's service. I agree with you on the exceptional job that he's done. You have big shoes to fill, but I certainly believe you're the officer to do so. I just wanted to comment very quickly. I wasn't going to do it, but my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have talked about these vacancies. I agree, we need to fill the vacancies, but none of them have mentioned the unprecedented obstruction that they've undertaken under Senator Schumer's leadership to block and put 30 hours of debate on almost every Trump administration nominee. So let's do this. Let's get the vacancies filled, but let's quit the obstruction. I think that's a good way to work through this, but it's an issue that doesn't get enough attention. The issue that Chairman Inhofe also raised, which I think is an important one with regard to readiness, he mentioned 5% of the brigade combat teams, I think it was 3 out of 58, were at the highest level of readiness in 2015 when you took over. You've done an outstanding job of digging out of that hole by the Obama administration and sequestration when we cut defense spending by 25% from 2010 to 2015. General, I know you've read this book, This Kind of War, by T.R. Fehrenbach. Can you talk to me about just what you see as with regard to what was in this book, highlighting how thousands of American soldiers were killed and wounded in the summer of 1950 because of lack of readiness and training? And if confirmed, will you commit to this committee to make sure we never get near that level of a lack of readiness that killed so many of our soldiers that summer?
Thanks, Senator. That book is a wonderful book to read, and there's many others on the Korean War. And you may or may not know it, but General Dunford's father fought in the Korean War and is a Marine veteran of the Chosin Reservoir. And that first summer was a horrible experience as we come out of World War II in 1945. And between 1945 and 1950, we went from the greatest military in the world of something like 8 to 10 million soldiers and 50,000 aircraft and so on and so forth. And then ripped ourselves apart in a very short period of time in 5 years, so that when the summer of 1950 comes around, we deployed forces, and of course the first force was an Army force, Task Force Smith, and it's tragic, it's horrific, from July all the way to December.
Lack of training, lack of funding.
Lack of funding, lack of readiness, equipment, ammunition, all of that stuff led to the deaths of tens of thousands of American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. It should never happen again. It's been drilled into all of us since we were lieutenants, never to let that happen.
Well, I commend you for your focus on that and ask you to make sure all your civilian and military counterparts have read this book when they come under your command. But I do want to get your commitment that with regard to training, there's sometimes pressure for you to reduce the levels of training that you will commit to this committee to keep the highest standards of training for our military. Can I get your commitment on that, if confirmed? As you and I have discussed, there's 2 areas where I believe the Pentagon has not focused enough of its attention. 2 key strategic areas are force posture in the Asia-Pacific and the strategic great power competition taking place in the Arctic. If confirmed, will you work with this committee? We have a provision in this year's NDAA to look at our force posture in the Asia-Pacific to make it fit with the great power competition, the national defense strategy, and the rise of China?
I will. If confirmed, I'll absolutely take a look at it. It's a critical region. Same thing with the Arctic, by the way. I think we need to really take a hard look at the Arctic as to what's happening.
Let me just talk about that for a minute. You know, there's almost daily headlines. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this for the record. Just in the last 3 months, there's been several articles about the expanding Russian and China influence in the Arctic. Secretary Pompeo gave an excellent speech recently at the Arctic Council about the great power competition. Even as you and I just briefly talked about in today's Defense One, Admiral Fogo puts an article in that paper on the Arctic about the Russian buildup, ports, airfields, and yet a provision in this year's NDAA to simply have a port in the Arctic in America that could handle a destroyer, pretty simple, was opposed by the Pentagon. Can I get your commitment, if confirmed, to work with us to make sure we're not lacking from a strategic military perspective in the Arctic?
You have my commitment, Senator.
Let me ask one final question, General. By next year, Alaska is going to have over 100 fifth-generation fighters. This is in part because of what Billy Mitchell said many years ago when he was an Army general, that Alaska is the most strategic place in the world. Despite this buildup of 100 fifth-gen fighters, we have tanker fleets there that are over 50 years old. The Air Force is looking at their OCONUS deployment of KC-46s. If confirmed, will you work with this committee to look at what I think is a very obvious place to put new KC-46s is in the place that's the most strategic place in the world with 100 fifth-gen fighters. That would be Eielson Air Force Base. Can I get your commitment to work with the committee on that?
If confirmed, I will definitely work with that and look at it and make my recommendations.
Thank you.
Absolutely.